Maybe you'll be fortunate enough to be with a large extended family for Thanksgiving this year, and I would just simply remind you all those things that you know you're not supposed to talk about with your extended family. And that would be religion, yes, and politics, certainly, and possibly money or sexual orientation. And I'm sure there may be other sort of issues that you do not want to discuss at the Thanksgiving table. So you remind one another, so that you get through that meal. And because you love your family, it's just you don't necessarily see eye to eye with all of them about all these important matters. In our gospel today, Jesus doesn't get the choice not to say something about 3 of the 4 things I just mentioned. With a very interested crowd listening in, Jesus is asked to make a stand on money, politics, and religion. His questioners ask if, in his opinion, it is lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not. The question seems simple. It is anything but. Despite the obsequious way the Pharisees and Herodians approach Jesus, "Teacher, we know you are sincere. Teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality." Jesus knows this is a trap. After this flattery comes the real point. We're just a tiny little bit unclear about where you stand on this church-state relationship, on this God and tax thing, on where your loyalty actually lies. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now understand, this was such a loaded question because this wasn't just any old tax. People of that day were accustomed to paying taxes. There were temple taxes and custom taxes and land taxes, to name a few. But the imperial tax that Jesus is asked about here was a tribute paid directly to Rome to support the Roman occupation of Israel. So these first-century Jews were forced to pay a denarius every year to their oppressors to support their own oppression. The denarius had the stamp of the emperor, often with rays going from his head like a heavenly being. For devout Jews, simply carrying this coin with the words Divi Filius, Son of the Deified One, was sacrilegious. On the back was often found an image of the benefits Caesar gave, that the Caesars of all time promise: peace, security, prosperity. The crowd gathered around Jesus that day were by and large people who understandably hated the indignity of having to pay that tax. Clearly, they were interested in the answer. Now, Matthew tells us that the questioners were from the Pharisees and the Herodians, which was interesting in itself. These were 2 groups who normally would never see eye to eye on anything, have anything to do with one another. The Herodians were people who owed their livelihood to the Roman occupiers. They were big supporters of the government and pro-tax. The Pharisees, on the other hand, represented the religiously devout. They believed Tiberius Caesar did not have the authority to this tax because it conflicted with the Torah, God's covenant promise with the people. But as we know in our own day, politics has a way of making strange bedfellows, and bringing Jesus down was something the 2 groups could agree on. And you have to hand it to them. It was a very clever question that meant no matter which way Jesus answered, he was going to be in trouble. If he said, yes, your allegiance is to Caesar, he would anger many of his supporters. If, on the other hand, he told people not to pay the tax, he could be charged as a rebel and a traitor and subject to arrest. Hypocrites, Jesus said, because they were not interested in the truth or in what he taught. He knew what was up. He asked for a coin. Had to have been Herodian, I figure, who had the coin, because a Pharisee would not have dirtied his hands with such a coin, or shouldn't have. When they showed him a coin, Jesus asked whose image it bore. The emperor's, they replied. Jesus said, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And in so saying, Matthew says, he completely disarmed them, and they went away amazed. One wonders, though, if this answer leaves us as amazed as it did those who questioned Jesus. After all, we live in a very, very different world. We have a different understanding of how we owe allegiance to country and to God. We already do render unto Caesar, as it says in the King James Version. And in our case, Caesar is not an occupying force, but our democratically elected representatives. We may get angry with them, but we know that we are blessed in many ways. We pay our taxes reluctantly, but we do understand at some level that the services we receive, the security we enjoy, the ordered, prosperous way of life we desire, does have to be paid for. Yes, we pay our taxes. Most of us try to be informed voters. Some of us volunteer for the community good, and some even run for public office. And many in this congregation, anyway, serve or have served in the military. We may be troubled at times, especially today, with the direction our country is headed. We may have different priorities or even very deep concerns about the current administration, but on the whole, we understand ourselves to be players in the game. We will render what is owed to Caesar. There's just one problem, and the Pharisees noted it right away. The problem is the God part. When they showed the coin to Jesus, he asked whose image it bore. Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, of course. Why, yes, it does. But Jesus was, in effect, raising a more important question, which is not whose image is on the coin, but whose image is on you. That's important. That's why they were amazed, because they knew that was the truth. From the opening pages of Genesis, we learn of God's intention to make us in God's own image. That is who we are. And that means while we might feel a strong allegiance to country or political party or to our families or any number of things, before any of these allegiances, we belong to God. And that has real life, real-time ramifications. We may think, for instance, how we spend our coins is our own business and no one else's, but if we go down that road, we begin to believe that we are self-made and worth the sum of our possessions. And Jesus today says, no, you are more than that. You are a child of God. You are made in the image of God. That is the image that is stamped on you. That's a very timely message, I think, for us. Jesus says, yes, Caesar and all the lesser loyalties, many of them very good, will have a part of you. But at the same time, never forget that God has all of you, because you and I belong first and foremost to God. And that means every waking moment, every decision, every relationship, every vote, every dollar, every YouTube you like and forward on, every decision I make about my family and my future, everything that we have and everything that we are, Jesus says, is God's, because everything you are and everything you have comes from God. because you bear the image of God. How you spend your coins, how you spend your life matters. How do we do that? Well, Jesus didn't leave us with a simple-minded answer to the question of how we should order our lives as disciples. There are elements of our lives that are part of the way that the world is ordered. Among them, for instance, marriage and family, and all the institutions and laws that are intended to make human life possible and even flourish. But Jesus is pointing to the larger truth that even the good elements are partial. Our deepest self, our fundamental being, belongs to God alone. And of course, if we can hold on to that truth, we will find it has a way of making the rest of our lives come more into focus. The challenge of Jesus' teaching always seems to come home to us when we talk specifically about money. I heard of a pastor who invited folks to draw a cross on their credit card or checkbook, or however one might pay one's obligations today. It seemed like it's sort of a modern take on the carry a little, cross in your pocket thing from days when you actually did reach into your pocket for money. It was, of course, meant to do the same thing, just to sort of be a reminder that our whole lives belong to God. And someone who took her up on that and did this exercise reported that he thought it would make him feel bad, as it would clearly point out to him how he woefully mismanaged his priorities. But he said, in fact, it was rather empowering, he said. He said it reminded him of his identity as a child of God. He said that no spending or saving could change. He said it rooted him in his faith, and it did help him reflect on how his faith shapes his daily life, especially his economic life. Remembering who we are as children of God should impact not only how we spend and make our money, but also how I said we spend our time, our very lives. Now it occurred to me, when I say that you belong to God or that you bear the image of God, it could sound like I'm saying you should feel bad about all the really awful decisions that you make about your life. And I can tell from your faces you're considering that. I mean, let's just be honest. How many things do we do in the course of a week that, shall we say, don't exactly reflect the love of God? Which is why we begin almost every service with what? Confession. Yeah. But folks, what I'm really trying to say is that when Jesus tells us we belong to God, it means no matter what we do or say, no matter how lost we get amid the conflicting demands for our attention and love, no matter what, we are still beloved children of God. We bear the image of our Creator. This is not our doing. We didn't put it on like a Halloween costume. This is God's doing. We are named and claimed by God in the waters of baptism. You are beloved. Don't let Caesar or anyone else tell you otherwise, because that is what God has called you. Thanks be to God. Amen.